Welcome to the How to Play Battletech Advanced Tactics Series, Commander. This video is intended to be a definitive guide on how to build a lance in Classic Battletech. In order to bring you the best information available on YouTube, I interviewed players who consistently find success in online global tournaments and incorporated their strategies and tactics into this guide. If you're one of the few who make it to the end of this video, you'll be well on your way to mastering Classic Battletech. Let's get started. Okay, lances. Let's go over how to build a lance in Classic Battletech and what you need to know in order to be successful. Okay, so the big thing to know is that lances are teams. Lances are teams, and in my opinion, they should be designed as such. At the end of the day, no way is ultimately wrong on how to design a lance. You can really just grab 4 mechs and just throw them in and call it a lance, and yeah, that's fine. But I think when people ask on the internet, how do I build a lance? What they're really asking is, how do I build something that's effective, right? How do I build something that works on tabletop that can help me win games? All right, so each mech has a different function, or mechs have different functions. Just like members on a basketball team, you have your kind of larger centers, right, that are taking up space, that are kind of tanking for your team. You have your playmaker, your point guards, right, that are kind of calling the shots or making the plays, setting up the plays. And then you have your kind of small forwards and like outside shooting specialists, right? So each mech has a different function, and each mech is playing a different role to make that lance or that team successful. So some of the things that I've seen on the internet that are not the best way, or I don't think offer a complete understanding of how to design a lance, is mechs with all one chassis, right? Like, oh, I'm gonna run all Panthers or 2 Panthers and a Jenner, 2 Panthers and 2 Jenners, something like that. All one weight class, right? Like all mediums, or even saying like, hey, run one of each weight class, like 1 assault, 1 heavy, 1 medium, 1 light. May get you to the answer, but it doesn't offer like a complete understanding. I think you're kind of just falling into something that kind of works. But what we really want to do is try to understand in a complete way how to build a lance and why it works. Okay, so like a lot of people have mentioned, tier lists are just the beginning, and that's right. Tier lists are just identifying the particular players that have talent that can be slotted into a team. Okay, so the tier lists, all they're doing is they're identifying like the Michael Jordans of that weight class for you to put in and kind of complete that lance puzzle. Okay, so for this lecture, we're gonna go over a sample lance. This lance I designed called Taurian Freedom. It's 6,500 battle value. It uses all the mechs in the game of Armored Combat except for the Warhammer, and I think it's a very good starting point that you can try out and use and kind of modify to your taste. Okay, so for our agenda for today is we're going to go over some big picture stuff, then we're going to go and explain how to design your own, or the elements you need on your team to design your own. We're going to go through a few lore-friendly examples you can take as a starting point and kind of modify or start to play with. And then we're going to talk about how to go further. If we want to design companies, battalion, and regiments, how we go about doing that. Okay, with that being said, let's dive into it. So let's start off with big picture stuff. Let's go over the criteria for making lances, starting with game sizes and era. So for sizes, I would recommend 4 units. While it's a good starter, I would say try and get up to 6 units once you start to feel comfortable for the game. That seems to be the standard in the MRC, which plays, they play a lot of games. They play a lot of tournaments and a lot of narrative stuff, and just a whole lot of games in general. That seems to be the sweet spot for game sizes once you get comfortable with the rules and kind of can start going. For battle values, Secession War, good starting value seems to be 6,500. Once you get into the Greyhelm Memory Core stuff and you want to try that, you can go up to 7,000 battle value. And then once Clan Invasion starts to swing around, I would recommend bumping up to 7,500 to 8,000 battle value. 8,000 battle value if you're playing Inner Sphere versus Clan, and then 75 if you're playing like kind of an IS on IS, Inner Sphere versus Inner Sphere scenario. 8,000 battle value just lets the clans bring some bigger toys if they want to. Okay, so for bigger games, if you want to play some larger like company on company stuff, 1,200 to 20,000 battle value seems to be a good zone to play in, although it might take you a weekend or it might take you a whole day to resolve. Okay, so when you're thinking about building a lance, the first thing you want to start with is a theme, or like a general plan or a sketch of what you want to build. Are you building like a ranged lance? Are you building something that's very aggressive that wants to play up front? Or do you want something that's a little bit more balanced and adaptable, right? So it doesn't need to be like a complete picture, but maybe some just like general idea in your head. you want to think about different missions, right? You want to not only think about like a stand-up fight, but you want to think about these kind of hold the line scenarios or like a breakthrough scenario. In a breakthrough scenario, maybe you want like a fast runner, like a Jenner, to kind of blitz across the side of the field. Maybe you want to think about an extraction, so how you're going to extract a mech. Maybe you want some mechs to cover some of the maybe heavily armored but relatively quick mechs to kind of complete the mission. And then maybe you want to think about like some light hunters, like how are you going to chase down some things that are trying to escape, right? Thinking about this kind of helps during narrative play and helps create some variation or forces some variation in lists rather than you just purely tooling for like a stand-up fight or a skirmish kind of scenario. Okay. If you want to add in some extra flavor, I would recommend looking at the Zodal Rats table or the MUL, which will give you faction availability. I tend to like Zodal Rats since it gives, what mechs are common in what eras, compared to the MUL, which gives you just what mechs are available. But your choice. For a game of Armored Combat for our Taurian Freedom unit, we decided to go with like a take-all-comers lance that was available to all factions. All right. So the next thing you want to think about is Mech Roles, right? So these are the positions in a lance. This is kind of a graphic that I came up with that I think explains things a little bit better or describes mechs a little bit better than what they currently have over at Catalyst kind of built in. So it's kind of an updated roles thing. Kind of easier to understand and swap out mechs, in my opinion. We cover this more in the How to Master Any Mech or this Beginner's Guide to Battletech. But very quickly, you have these battle line mechs, right? These frontline guys that are very tanky that play up front. You have these range guys that are range DPS. You have these bodyguard guys that are playing with the battle lines and range mechs that are protecting from the scout and cavalry guys, your flankers. These scout and cavalry guys, their mission is to try and attack these battle line and range and make it very difficult for them to get good damage off. And then you have your two specialist roles, your linebreaker, which is kind of a slower all-in mech, and then an ambusher that kind of is something that kind of lurks around to try and catch someone out of position or make it hard to advance. And then within that, you have these kind of hybrid roles that combined one or more of these roles. Okay, so basic template, if you're starting out, if you just have a 4-man unit, is to start with your front line, your battle line, having a bodyguard to play with to protect these battle line and ranged, one ranged DPS guy, and then one cavalry guy to make the plays. If you're expanding out to a 6-man unit, I would recommend adding in 2 wild cards, so kind of like 2 other mechs in whatever role you want that will kind of change the way that the lance plays. I think this is a basic template, a good starter template to go with. If you're wondering what mechs I should collect or what mechs are good for these roles, these are kind of 8 beginner mechs that I would say are good to start with. Why? They're relatively available to every faction and in every era. So no matter what era you play in, from 30, 25 starting forward, all these mechs are available. And they cover every role, right? So you can easily slot them into your collection depending on what you need and what you need to accomplish. So Firestarter, Wolverine, Grasshopper, Catapult, Centurion, Thunderbolt, Warhammer, and Awesome, I think are all great mechs to start with. In the description down below, I'll leave you links to where you can find them. Okay, so now that we understand the big picture, let's start going into how we go about doing that. Basically, what does every team need? What elements does every lance need? So the first thing you need to consider is initiative when you're building a lance. You want to balance your lance with guys that want to go in the front and guys that want to go in the back, right? So you need your tanky guys to tank the hits and then enable your playmakers that want to go at the end. If you have too many guys, too many playmakers, too many guys that want to go at the end, you're going to jam up your initiative, and then some of the playmakers are not able to get value because they'll end up out of position, right? If you have too many guys that want to go first, too many slow tanky guys, then it's hard to take advantage of opportunity. You won't have any mech to kind of outflank or outmaneuver that wants to really go at the end, so you're kind of missing out. All right, so in our a game of Armored Combat list, we have the Awesome and the Warhammer that kind of want to go in the front or front middle of the initiative. We have our Thunderbolt that wants to go in the center, and then we have our Wolverine, our Playmaker, that wants to go last. These 2 mechs, this Commando and Locust, are our floaters. These are our initiative sinks. We can push them up front to get more information, to buy a turn, or we can move them in the back to kind of make a play, right? So these are our flex mechs. The next thing you want to consider is Piercing Crit. Cover this in the weapons guide a little bit more, but basically we want to punch a hole first and follow up with crit weapons. We don't want to be grinding through all these dots of armor, a very fast way to take down a mech is to punch a hole first and then try and trigger a critical hit on an ammo bin or something like that, and then blow up the mech. A good number to start with, in my opinion, is starting with 1 piercing weapon per 1000 BV and adjusting from there. Obviously, your mileage will vary, right? A mech that has a veteran pilot or an elite pilot will be worth more here, but starting with 1 piercing per 1000 battle value seems to be the way to go, and then tweaking as you go along. You want to spread this out amongst your mechs. So in our AGOC lance, we have 3 mechs that can have piercing weapons, and then 4 mechs that have a little bit more crit base, right? So the Awesome has 3 PPCs, Warhammer has 2 PPCs, Thunderbolt has a large laser. On the crit side, we have the Warhammer with 6 SRM6. We have the Wolverine with an SRM6. We have the Commando with an SRM6 and a SRM4. And then we have this Locust with 2 machine guns and a medium laser, which can do kind of something. If I was to critique this list, our piercing weapons are a little bit focused in the Awesome here. And it's okay. We can make it work. No lance is perfect, but maybe we're putting too many eggs in one basket here. All right, the next thing we want to consider is range weapons versus brawl weapons. If you have too many range weapons, meaning you have like too many bow and arrows, you're going to get carved up in a brawl, right? The enemy's just going to close with you and carve you up. If you have too many brawl weapons, you have too many close range weapons, you're going to get softened up as you close and then finished off once you do close to brawl. So a good balance, a good place to start is having a little bit more than your opponent. And this forces the enemy to close with you, right? So it puts the pressure on them to close with you. And then you can later handle the remaining survivors with the rest of your brawl weapons, your efficiency weapons. You can clean up the survivors. In our AGOC lance, we have 5 PPCs and 15 LRMs. So when we start out, we want to judge the opponent's lance and see how many PPCs and LRMs they bring. If they're only bringing, for example, 3 PPCs, then we're happy to just sit back and trade all day. If they have more than us, then again, the pressure is on us to close, which makes it a little bit harder to play, which is why when you're starting out, I think having a little bit more range than your opponent, or trying to design a lance that has a little bit more range than your opponent, is a good way to start. Okay, so the next thing you want to take into consideration is the balance between speed and equipment on your lance. Having more speed on some of your mechs, particularly if they're tanky, will help complete objectives. Things like capture the flag, king of the hill, will help you, get there first, or even like extraction or escaping on the other side of the board, things like that. Mechs that are faster can typically, do flanking, although they do need initiative to pull that off, right? Like we talked about before. Speed can also compensate for a lack of ranged weapons, right? So you can use your speed to close the distance and negate the advantage that an LRM might have, for example. However, you do need to keep in mind that it results in your mech having overall less armor and weapons, right? So you only have a certain amount of tonnage on that mech. For example, if you commit a lot of resources to having more speed, once you close with the enemy brawlers, if they're slower, they'll naturally have more weapons and more armor and be able to kind of trade better with you and win out in the long run, right? They'll be able to kind of out tank you, right? So you can become outgunned and out armored. So the other thing you want to consider when you start to get into campaigns or you start to get into the company level or higher is having match speeds on your lances. That'll help your units move together and make sure that tonnage is not wasted. I can show you an example now. So in this scenario, let's say we split this 6-man team into 2 groups. Unfortunately, for our Taurian Freedom Lance, if this was a campaign, the battle line would have to move at 3-5, right? It'd have to move at the rate of the slowest mech, the Awesome. So it'd be a little slower. The tonnage is a little wasted here at 4-6 until you actually get into a fight. If we're using this as a scout lance or a scout group, unfortunately, the Locust's speed is wasted here at 8-12. They have to move at the rate of the slowest mech, so 5-8-5 or 6-9, depending on the terrain. So yeah, this is basically a weakness of this lance composition, but it's not perfect. It's a kind of an AGOC group, mechs that are only found in AGOC except for the Warhammer. If we're trying to refine this, if we're moving up into the company level or higher, we might consider building around the 4-6 speed, so swapping out the Awesome for another mech that moves at 4-6. If we're trying to build a scout lance out of this, maybe we want to build around the 5-8-5 speed, so we have mechs that move at 5-8-5, or maybe they move at 6-9. just designing around a single speed. When you get to this size and you start designing a lance, it's actually okay to have, in my opinion, one mech that's slightly faster, but you want to have the majority of your units all moving at one speed. Okay, and the fifth thing you need to consider is utility. Things like command mech will help you win the initiative and help your other mechs get into position. Things like inferno ammo will help with crowd control and reduce damage, like we covered in the weapons lecture. And then you typically want to run this on mechs with 2 tons of ammo, things like the Javelin or the Kintaro, things with more than 2 tons of ammo, so you can kind of swap or pick which one you want to use at which time. Having some anti-infantry like flamer machine guns, inferno weapons, and pulse lasers will help. You don't really need to consider this until you're playing with combined arms, but I think for story reasons, it's pretty good to have at least a couple of them. Against things like tanks and air, what you want is a lot of triggers. So things like the AC2 is not bad because you're just getting a trigger. It doesn't really matter how much damage you do. You just want to get a trigger of damage. Things like the LRM5 are not bad here. Inferno rounds when you're fighting tanks are pretty good as well. One way you can think of mechs is as a package. So when you buy a mech, you kind of think that you're buying this many piercing weapons, this many crit weapons, this many range weapons, and this type of utility, and it's filling this role. And if you think of the mechs like this, you can kind of slot them in like Legos, right? So you can kind of mix and match or pick which mechs with which characteristics you want, and then kind of look at your unit overall and see, how many piercing weapons you have in total, how many crit weapons you have in total, how many range weapons you have in total. And that's kind of how you can start to evaluate a lance and kind of help with, which will help with balance. Okay, so with that being said, let's go over a few themed lances now, okay? So these are sample lances that myself and people from the MRC Discord came up with. They're themed lists for each faction. I asked them to balance their competitiveness with the lore. These are not tested, but they are made by people with a bunch of experience, so you're going to have to kind of take them for a spin and then kind of make adjustments later. And then we're going to go over a number of these so we can start to understand patterns. I think by going through a number of these lances, we'll start to see, how you would build your own, right? They use the Zodal Rats table, and they're mostly common mechs. Some iconic mechs are used for each faction to kind of make it a little more spicy or a little bit more unique. And then we added in only a few rare ones as we go along, okay? On the Discord, there are going to be these lances if you want to download them, along with a couple other ones. Okay, so the first list I want to go over is the Mercenary Periphery list, the Taurian Freedom one that we made. It's basically a well-rounded unit based off of a game of Armored Combat. You can either run it as a Taurian list, or you can just say, hey, I just looted a commando off of, House Steiner or something like that. If you really wanted to go back to Agok, you could drop the Warhammer for the catapult, but then you'd have to add in a few more piercing weapons, in my opinion. But what this list does is it really gives you a lot of options. It's made to be a flexible list, a little bit more static, which is kind of how I personally like to play and how I would recommend a new player plays. With a more static list, you just have to worry about initial positioning rather than having to constantly close. The only real positioning issues you're gonna run into, or positioning problems you're gonna run into, is with the Wolverine, like where to place it, how to flank. But you're using the Thunderbolt as a frontliner, right? And then your Warhammer is your flexible range battle line, so you start at the ranged, and if you need to or at the right time, you can push your Warhammer forward. This awesome can even play in front of the Warhammer because it's so tanky. You can also kind of play it just a little bit behind the Thunderbolt if you want. The Wolverine here can be used as a flexible cavalry to kind of come and flank, but if you need a guard to play with your Thunderbolt, it's also quite scrappy, so it can kind of play in here as well. I'm a little bit hesitant to use the commando. I've never used it too much, but you might need to pull it back and use it as a lurker here. It's a little bit fragile. And then your locust here is initiative sync along with the commando. If I did need to make some adjustments, I might combine these two, and then I might combine it maybe into like a Phoenix Hawk or something, maybe shave some points somewhere. But yeah, pretty much this is how I'd play it. You got a lot of different options. Quite nice, flexible, easy to use beginner lance in my opinion. Okay. The next lance we want to go over is the first one for House Steiner. We called this the Steiner Sledgehammer. It's built around just very heavy mechs, three heavies and one assault. You're just meant to go forward and, have fun and brawl the enemy. The light mechs here, the scouts, are the commando and the locust. Again, they're pulled back here because you have basically no cavalry with this very strong center. they're kind of going to be a little bit challenged to fight off or fend off any kind of cavalry mechs your opponent might have. I would monitor this. If I needed to change it, maybe I would swap out the this Flashman for a Grasshopper, or the Thunderbolt for a Grasshopper or something, just so that I could deal with kind of fast movers. The Archer here is the S variant with the LRM-15s and SRMs, so it's also a flex mech, right? So you can kind of bring it up front. It also has some brawl, so it's not completely defensive if you get pushed, okay? But yeah, this is the Steiner ones, just heavy mechs to brawl, weak cavalry, as it should be with House Steiner. The second list is a 30-50 list. So we're Vapor here, who made the list, wanted to play with the new toys that Steiner gets. So it's built around the Devastator, which is a kind of upgraded version of the Awesome. Very, very powerful. He made it a veteran pilot, so he sunk a lot of points into here. So you're basically using this guy as an anchor. He said that he would start by using the Axeman actually as a guard for this Devastator, even though it has the powerful AC-20. So interesting idea here with the Axeman. And then he's using the Phoenix Hawk and the Wolfhound to harass out here. And then this Commando is used as a lurker or a crit seeker, right? So again, I'm not sure exactly how to use a Commando. I haven't played it in a whole ton of games. I think maybe 2 or 3. But yeah, kind of pulling the Commando back and using as an initiative sync doesn't seem like a bad idea. All right. This next list is House Kurita or Rasalhague. It's built around the Charger and the Victor. It's called Brawl-halla Banzai. So it's in the name. You pretty much just run it down mid with these 3 mechs, and you try and get your Victor with the AC-20 and your Charger into position for kicks and short range goodness. It's mixed range, and it uses a bunch of kind of medium mechs, which House Kurita doesn't like. So I kind of envision this as maybe like the Legion of Vega, like the Penal Legions, the guys that get all the junky equipment are kind of piling this list or using this list. But yeah, it can also be used as Rasalhague, as they're kind of scrappy as well. Pretty much what you're doing with this list, instead of having that big anchor like we saw on the other 2 lists, using the K2 and the Panther here as your range anchors initiative sinks, and then you're really trying to get the last turn with these Victors and Chargers to get them to really get value out of this. But should be pretty fun if you just want to run it down. Another interesting thing here is that everyone has kind of mixed speeds, which is kind of nice. Kind of theme, I think. Everyone's running these various ramshackle mechs that don't necessarily work well together, but you're kind of forced to use them together. So interesting theme, I thought. The other one contrasting this is the Comstar Samurai list. Again, advancing the timeline up to 3050 during clan invasion. These are the elite of the dragon, right? So these guys get the Comstar goodies during the deal with Rasalhague. A couple of regiments get Comstar mechs. So this one uses the Thug and the Guillotine, which are really tough, really good Comstar mechs. And then it also uses 2 iconic Kurita mechs, right, with the Jenner D and then the Crusader 3K, and then it has a fire starter for good measure. So your center line here is only running 2 guys, but they're quite versatile, right? They're range battle lines, so you're starting off with your LRMs and PPCs, and you're swapping to your SRMs later on in the fight. And you have this big Guillotine as a big threat ready to stomp on anything. So interesting contrast there. Moving on to House Davion. House Davion's, this is the Democratic Crusaders list built by Inept. He had an interesting idea here. He's using his main force, these 4 mechs, to kind of move around and hunt down the mech with the lowest TMM. So just using to kind of pounce on, just focus firing 1 mech at a time. He has the Assault down here, kind of hunting down any kind of crippled mechs or finishing them off. And then he's using his Javelin as a sink, or equipping it with Infernos to also kind of lock down or CC any kind of big threat here. So interesting way to use House Davion. The other one is one that I built. I built this one as a flex range Mary Sue, as kind of a joke to House Davion being Mary Sue's. So this list, I would imagine, built by maybe a very edgy teenager or something like that, that wants to have a list that is good for any situation that comes up. So it's using a lot of flexible mechs here. it's kind of a take all comers list to the max, right? So you have your trebuchet that's a ranged cavalry. You have your crusader that is ranged but also can flip to a brawler. You have your enforcer as kind of a fire support mech, and you have this really strong Warhammer 6D here. It's not, the Warhammer 6D variant is not as fragile as the original. It doesn't have ammunition, has a lot of armor, so you can kind of use it as almost like a French liner, even though it's a ranged battle line mech. So very flexible main force here. It's led by a Phoenix Hawk, and then you have a Locust for that sinking. One thing I did have to worry about, or would worry about, or would pay attention to, is the Enforcer's low back armor. So I really would. I don't think that Enforcer can really defend itself against lights as well. It kind of needs help, so I might need to pull back a couple of these mechs here to help it out, or make sure the Trebuchet kind of stays near it, right, with its lasers. All right, moving on to House Liao. So this is a more refined kind of all-in list. We're calling this Jump Raiders because everything is moving in formation, right? So these two move at 696, and then the main force moves at 464. So everything kind of moves together. A little bit more refined than the Banzai list we saw earlier. So everything's jump capable. Lore-wise, you can use these as raiders, right? So a bunch of things have arms to kind of grab and steal things. You may struggle if the enemy out-armors you, right? Because everything has jump jets. You paid for the tonnage in jump jets rather than armor and weapons. But I think you still have some pretty good some options here. The Catapult's very, very strong. The Grasshopper is very, very strong. The Victor's kind of punch things open with its AC-20, and then you're using this Javelin to kind of follow up and crit things out. Should be a fun list. I think it'll be okay. The second list for House Liao is the Cappellan A-Team, built by MRC Jesty. Here is a very interesting example of if you don't have a lot of mechs, and one of the beauties of Battletech is you can just upskill your mechs, and then you can actually make your points that way. So you have a very elite 4-man unit, right? A 4-man unit compared to the 6 or 5 mechs we saw before. It's built around the Awesome as an anchor, a 2-3 mech. He's actually playing it a little bit up front with the Vindicator in support. And then these two guys are being used as objective takers or harassers, right? So very, very simple cut down list, right? Down to essentially, basically down to the bare essentials here. But interesting to see what you can do with some elites. So for House Marik, the next list is built by MRC Luke Winters. By now, you should be seeing a bunch of patterns, right? So you have your flankers and you have your center line is essentially how you play. So this is just meant to underscore kind of how you play. This is a very standard way of playing. It's built around very high armor, high heat efficient mechs. So things like the Black Knight, the iconic Black Knight. The Marauder 3M is using the large lasers rather than the PPCs, so it can kind of play up front. It's also got quite a bit of armor. And then the Stalker is playing in the center. You have your Ossol for a flank, and then this little tiny Flea, which is kind of like a Locust, essentially, but made of paper, kind of running around as your initiative sinker. So yeah, so this is just meant to show just basic Battletech, I would say, or like a standard kind of line or a small variant of a line. And then finally for House Marik, we have the Mr. Krabs Hates Friends list. This is a power gamey list designed to be just a really power gamey list, take advantage of really, really strong designs, right? A-tier designs with the Grasshopper, Crab, you have the Hunchback energy build, and then you have your double Wolverine here with a really, really strong kind of example of a power gaming list. I wouldn't really run this against a friend or against someone I was, playing for the first time. But if you really need a win, you can play this list. I think it's very strong. You're basically attacking in 2 waves with the Grasshopper and double Wolverine going in. And then you're getting your King Crab to kind of waddle up, King Crab and Hunchback to waddle up, and then follow up and, really just blow holes in things. This Crab can either be used to support this attack, or you can use it to screen and help the King Crab get position. But you're basically babying your King Crab up the board into brawl range, and then using these guys to just totally smash or ruin the enemy's day, okay? All right, so with that out of the way, let's move on to talking about company, battalion, and regiment. So what if you wanted to kind of scale up? What if you wanted to go larger? So just something to keep in mind, this is a little bit more theory than tested. Battletech takes a long time to resolve, so just some initial thoughts about how these would play out or how these would fight out. For full disclosure, I have a couple of Mega Mech campaigns, one real tabletop campaign, and then a couple of larger like 20k BV game. So I wouldn't call myself an expert by any means when it comes to battalion, regiment fights, but a little bit more theory here, but I'll show you what I think. So some expansion ideas. Each mech, so you have your basic lance here. The easy way to think about it is each mech becomes its own kind of lance, and you want to build around a single speed so you can move together as a unit, right? And each unit, each lance should be self-sufficient with its own piercing and crit and its own initiative sinkers. So I'll show you here. Here's a company example. So we basically expanded the main force into 2 lances, and we expanded the javelin, the scout mech, into its own lance. So here we have a 696 scout lance led by the Phoenix Hawk with its piercing weapon. We have crit with the javelin here, and then we have a bunch of efficiency weapons with the other 2 mechs here. This is a scout and anti-infantry, so you're right with the fire starter, the javelin's running infernos. I think the Vulcan might have a machine gun, and then the Phoenix Hawk has 2 machine guns, right? So this is our kind of quick reaction force flankers / anti-infantry unit. Then we have 2 battle line units here. Again, each unit has its own piercing with its warhammers, right? The Orion has an AC-10. The Thunderbolt has a large laser. And then this one is a little bit more anti-air or a little bit more ranged. We have the Rifleman here. And then this squad here, we have the Orion with its anti-air quirk. Again, this unit moves at the rate of the slowest mech, so these guys are moving at 4.6. We have 1 mech here, so the Wolverine and then the Trebuchet, that are moving slightly faster to deal with kind of any flankers, or they can move out and kind of help out and flank themselves if the situation calls for it. But yeah, this is kind of how I would set up a basic mercenary heavy company or something like that. All right. Just like mech rolls, I do think that there are lance rolls. So really quick, you can have scout lances. You can have anti-infantry lances. You can have a quick reaction force. You can have just a regular standard battle line that's meant to stay up front and take hits. You can have something that's ranged, line breakers, anti-air, or like even a headquarters unit. So these are some ideas or themes of each lance that you can start to build around, okay? Lastly is logistics. So this is a little bit more lore friendly, or if you want to, really get deeper into the lore, you want to build around a dropship, right? So the classic example, the classic dropship is the Union with 12 mechs and 2 aerospace, and Overlord if you're going to battalion size with 36 mechs and 6 aerospace. So if you're designing a battalion or a company, you want to keep in mind that you only have a certain number of mechs on a dropship, a certain amount of slots on a dropship, and yeah, just build around that. Make sure you don't go over, right? So you can kind of justify traveling around with your your mechs and stuff like that. You also want to think about spare parts, especially on your Mega Mech campaign. You want to think about like the rarative weapons. Where can you source these weapons? Maybe you don't want to, buy those high-end LBs or those high-end ERPPCs because they're harder to find. And maybe you want to rely on some easier to find weapons like ACs. Keep in mind, if you have fewer parts, so if you build around, having mostly like large lasers, for example, then you can share those parts between your mechs. And then having, limited number of weight classes or different chassis will help you on the repair side as well with logistics. Okay, that's it for this lecture. I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Lecture notes are on the Discord.